A mother leopard kept crying after birth, but these weren't ordinary cries. They were desperate, haunting, and unending. At first, everyone brushed it off, until a young vet stepped in and made a discovery so shocking it broke everyone who witnessed it. Behind the bars of that enclosure wasn't just an animal in pain. It was a secret no one was prepared to face. What was hidden in the shadows of this wildlife center? Why would powerful men risk everything to silence the truth? And when the Dios in May, cries grew louder, echoing through the night, one question remained. What was the mother leopard trying to tell us all along? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The autumn night settled over the rural wildlife center like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a chill that made the metal buildings creak and groan. But those sounds were nothing compared to the haunting cries that pierced the darkness. The relentless wailing of a mother leopard who had just given birth. Dr. Carolyn Mercer hurried across the gravel path, her boots crunching with each step. The call had come just as she was finishing her evening rounds. Her first week as the center's new veterinarian had been busy enough without this emergency. Her stethoscope bounced against her chest as she jogged, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the gathering gloom. The leopard's cries grew louder as Caroline approached the enclosure building. She found two night staff members lounging by the monitoring station, scrolling on their phones despite the heart-wrenching sounds echoing through the facility. How long has she been crying like this? Caroline asked, already reaching for her medical kit. One of the staff members barely glanced up. Few hours, normal for new moms. They get worked up. Caroline frowned, pulling out her notebook. Has anyone checked her vitals since the birth? Brent said to leave her be, the other staff member replied with a shrug. He's handled plenty of big cat births before. As if summoned by his name, Brent Holloway's heavy footsteps announced his arrival. The senior handler filled the doorway, his weathered face set in hard lines. Dr. Mercer, this isn't your concern. I've got it under control. Caroline straightened, her spine meeting his dismissive gaze. As the facility veterinarian, any medical situation is my concern, Mr. Holloway. I need to assess the mother and cubs. It's just post-birth stress, Brent said, his tone leaving no room for argument. We'll sedate her if she doesn't settle by morning. I'd like to check first. Caroline insisted quietly, already moving toward the enclosure. The leopard's cries had taken on a different pitch, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Brent's large hand landed on her shoulder. Listen, doctor. You're new here. Trust me when I say this is normal. Caroline gently but firmly removed his hand. I understand your experience, Mr. Holloway, but I need to establish my own baseline observations. It's standard protocol. The leopard's enclosure was state-of-the-art, with reinforced walls and a comfortable birthing den. But something was off. The mother paced relentlessly, her golden coat gleaming under the security lights. Her cries weren't random, they followed a pattern, and her eyes kept darting to one particular corner of the den. Caroline began her assessment, methodically noting everything while Brent huffed impatiently behind her. The leopard's vital signs were elevated, but within range for a post-birth mother. The cubs, Caroline counted too, seemed healthy at first glance. But the mother's behavior, she needs sedation, Brent announced, already reaching for the tranquilizer kit. This crying will disturb the other animals. No, Caroline's voice was firm. Sedation could compromise her ability to care for the cubs. This isn't panic behavior. She's trying to communicate something. Communication? Brent scoffed. She's an animal doctor, not a person having a conversation. Caroline pulled out her tablet, making detailed notes. I need to see the feeding logs for the past week, and access to the security camera footage. That won't be necessary, Brent snapped. I've been handling these cats for 15 years. You've been here 5 days. The leopard's cries echoed off the walls, a sound of such profound distress that Caroline couldn't understand how anyone could ignore it. She watched as the mother repeatedly returned to that same corner, pressing her nose against it before resuming. Her pacing? Something is wrong, Caroline stated firmly, meeting Brent's hostile glare. Unlogging this as a medical concern and scheduling a full assessment at dawn. I'll stake my professional reputation on it. This isn't normal post-birth behavior. Brent's face darkened. You're overstepping, doctor. This is my facility. This is a wildlife rehabilitation center. Caroline corrected him calmly, continuing to document her observations. And I'm the attending veterinarian. I'll need those logs and footage before morning. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The other staff members had disappeared, leaving Caroline alone with Brent and the distressed mother leopard. She could feel Brent's anger radiating off him in waves, but she kept her focus on her patient. Dawn check will show you're wrong, Brent growled, turning to leave. And then we'll discuss how things really work around here. Caroline waited until his footsteps faded before approaching the enclosure barrier. The leopard paused in her pacing, those intelligent eyes meeting Caroline's. There was something in that gaze, something that strengthened Caroline's resolve. I hear you, she whispered to the mother, and I'm not going anywhere until we figure this out. She settled in for a long night, her notebook open, recording every detail of the leopard's behavior. The cries continued to echo through the darkness, but now they weren't just sounds of distress to Caroline. They were a mystery that needed solving, no matter what it might cost her professionally. The mother leopard resumed her ritual, pacing, crying, fixing on that corner, while Caroline watched and documented, her conviction growing stronger with each passing hour. Something was indeed very wrong here, and dawn couldn't come soon enough. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the wildlife center in soft golden hues. Caroline arrived early, her boots crunching on the gravel path as she made her way to the leopard's enclosure. The mother's cries, which had echoed through the night, now carried a different tone, more desperate, more focused. Caroline pulled on her examination gloves, her movements careful and deliberate. The mother leopard's golden eyes tracked her every move, but the big cat didn't show any aggression. Instead, she paced near the den's entrance, her tail twitching with obvious distress. Let's see what's going on here, girl, Caroline murmured, beginning her examination. She checked the mother's vitals first. Temperature, heart rate, respiration. Everything seemed normal for a post-birth female. But when she moved to examine the cubs, her heart stopped. 1, 2, 3. She counted. Again, her hands trembling slightly. Where there had been 4 tiny cubs the night before, now only 3 remained. Caroline's stomach clenched as she double-checked every corner of the den. Heavy footsteps approached behind her. Problem, Dr. Mercer? Brent Holloway's voice carried its usual hint of condescension. We're missing a cub, Caroline stated firmly, standing to face him. There were 4 last night. Now there are 3. Brent's expression didn't change as he shrugged his broad shoulders. It happens in the wild. Mother cats sometimes consume. Weak offspring. Natural selection at work. Caroline's jaw tightened. This isn't the wild, Mr. Holloway. This is a controlled environment. Other staff members had gathered now, drawn by the conversation. The Wildlife Center's director arrived, his expensive loafers looking out of place on the dusty ground. Dr. Holloway is correct, the director announced, smoothing his silver hair. This is documented behavior. It's center policy not to interfere with natural processes. But Caroline wasn't listening anymore. She'd noticed something near the den's partition, fresh scratch marks that hadn't been there the night before. Moving closer, she detected a faint chemical smell, something antiseptic and artificial that had no place in a natural den. "I need to see the overnight camera footage," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The director cleared his throat. "Unfortunately, the security system was down for maintenance last night. No footage is available." Caroline turned to the feed logs posted by the enclosure's entrance. As she flipped through the pages, inconsistencies jumped out at her. Missing entries, changed times, and a strange notation in unfamiliar handwriting during the midnight shift. "These records don't match our standard protocols," she said, holding up the clipboard. Brent stepped forward, his massive frame blocking her view of the others. "Dr. Mercer, you're new here. Don't make the mistake of harassing my team with baseless accusations." The threat in his voice was clear, but Carolyn met his gaze calmly. "I'm not making accusations, Mr. Holloway. I'm doing my job." She retreated to the medical office, locking the door behind her. Her hands were steady as she typed up a detailed incident report, documenting everything she'd observed: the missing cub, the scratch marks, the chemical odor, the convenient camera malfunction, and the irregular logs. As she worked, she pulled up the staff schedule from the previous night. Something caught her eye, a gap in the overnight coverage that shouldn't have existed. According to the timestamps, the enclosure had been left unsupervised for nearly an hour around midnight. The mother leopard's cries filtered through the window, drawing Caroline to her feet. She stood watching the big cat pace, noting how she always returned to the same corner, how her cries seemed directed at the partition wall. The animal's behavior told a story that all the paperwork tried to hide. "Your cub isn't dead, is it?" Caroline whispered, pressing her hand against the glass. The leopard's raw, focused wailing was all the answer she needed. She returned to her computer, saving multiple copies of her report and all supporting documentation. Someone had taken that cub, and Caroline was determined to uncover the truth before the trail went cold. The easy explanation wasn't always the right one, and she refused to look away when her instincts screamed that something was wrong. As she gathered her evidence, the mother leopard's cries echoed through the building, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Caroline squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever consequences might come from challenging the center's authority. Sometimes doing the right thing meant standing alone, and she was prepared to do exactly that. Caroline took a deep breath and stepped out of the medical office, her notebook clutched close. The morning sun had climbed higher, but the air still held a chill. She needed answers, and she would start with the people least likely to have rehearsed their stories. She approached a young groundskeeper raking leaves near the perimeter fence. "How was your morning shift? Any deliveries or unusual activity?" The groundskeeper shrugged. "Pretty quiet. Though I did see that supply truck leaving super early. Weird timing." Caroline kept her expression neutral, despite her racing heart. "Supply truck? Yeah, before sunrise. Never seen one that early before. Usually they come after 8 in the morning." Making her way to the maintenance shed, Caroline found a junior aide organizing supplies. "I'm reviewing our delivery procedures," she said casually. "What's the normal protocol for receiving shipments?" The aide, barely out of college, looked up from his inventory list. "Oh, we're only supposed to accept deliveries during regular hours. It's policy for private facilities like ours. Security reasons, you know?" Caroline jotted down notes, her suspicions growing. "Has anyone ever broken that protocol?" "Well," the aide glanced around nervously. "There was a truck this morning, before dawn. I thought it was strange, but Mr. Holloway signed off on it." Following her instincts, Caroline made her way to the storage room. The fluorescent lights flickered as she examined the shelves, looking for anything out of place. Behind some empty crates, something caught her eye, a discarded shipping tag. She picked it up carefully, studying the details. It was from a veterinary supply company, but the code indicated shipping rather than medical supplies. Caroline's research into the vendor revealed a history of citations for poor oversight and documentation. The kind of supplier that wouldn't ask too many questions about unusual shipments. Armed with this information, she decided to confront the director first. She found him in his office, surrounded by framed conservation awards that now seemed mockingly hollow. "We need to discuss the early morning delivery," Caroline stated firmly. The director barely looked up from his computer. "I'm quite busy, Dr. Mercer, and I believe we've addressed all concerns about last night's events. A supply truck leaving before dawn violates facility protocols, and I found this." She placed the shipping tag on his desk. "It's for transport, not medical supplies." "Dr. Mercer," he sighed, finally meeting her eyes with clear condescension. "You're new here. Perhaps you don't understand how things work. Not everything requires your attention." From his office, Carolyn walked straight to the handler's station where Brent was reviewing schedules. The mother leopard's cries echoed across the grounds, spurring her forward. "Want to explain the unauthorized pre-dawn delivery?" she asked without preamble. Brent's face hardened. "You're overstepping, Doctor. Way overstepping. There are legal requirements for wildlife facilities." Caroline pressed. "Ethical obligations. The board of directors. Careers end fast around here." Brent cut her off, his voice low and threatening. "Especially for troublemakers who can't mind their own business." Caroline held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. The mother leopard's cries grew louder, as if encouraging her persistence. Back in her office, Caroline spread out her gathered evidence. The shipping tag, her notes about the delivery truck, feed logs with impossible timestamps, records of security, cameras conveniently malfunctioning, reports of unrecorded visitors. The pattern emerged with sickening clarity. They weren't just covering up negligence. This was organized trafficking. She reached for her phone, ready to contact external authorities, then hesitated. Without proof of the cub's location or clear documentation of its removal, any investigation could be buried under denials and destroyed evidence. She needed more, and she needed someone she could trust to help her get it. The mother leopard's cries continued their steady rhythm, like a clock counting down precious time. Caroline knew she was right about what had happened. Now she just had to prove it before it was too late for the stolen cub. She carefully stored her evidence in a secure location, knowing that her next steps would have to be perfectly planned. One wrong move could not only end her career, but destroy any chance of exposing the truth and rescuing the missing cub. Caroline drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, scanning the nearly empty parking lot of Maple's Diner. Located 15 miles from the wildlife center, the modest restaurant was far enough to avoid suspicious eyes. Her heart quickened as she spotted Daniel Keaton's familiar green pickup truck pulling in. The wildlife biologist's broad-shouldered figure emerged, his weathered face creasing with concern as he approached her car. Caroline had always appreciated his no-nonsense demeanor and genuine dedication to the animals. If anyone would understand the gravity of her discovery, it would be him. She got out, gripping her manila folder tightly. "Thanks for meeting me, Daniel. Your message sounded urgent," he said quietly, glancing around the lot. "Let's grab a booth in the back." Inside, they chose a secluded corner. The lunch rush had ended, leaving only a few scattered customers nursing coffee cups. Once the waitress had taken their order and moved away, Caroline leaned forward. "I need your help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us." Daniel's expression grew serious as Caroline methodically laid out her evidence. The missing cub, the suspicious truck, the doctored logs, and Brent's thinly veiled threats. She spread photos across the table, the scratched partition, the discarded shipping tag, the conflicting staff records. "I think they're selling exotic animals on the side," she concluded. That cub was stolen, not lost. She held her breath, waiting for Daniel to dismiss her theory like everyone else had. Instead, he studied each document intently, his jaw tightening. "I believe you," he said simply. Caroline felt tears of relief prick her eyes. "You do? The evidence is clear if you're willing to see it. And I've had my own suspicions about certain practices at the center." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "I know people who monitor exotic animal trafficking. They've been tracking an uptick in private sales across the region." For the next hour, they outlined a careful plan of action. Daniel's network had helped verify the cub's movement through shipping records and identify potential buyers. "We need to move carefully," Daniel warned. "If they catch wind we're investigating, that cub could disappear forever." Caroline nodded. "I can. Keep gathering evidence at the center. Photos, documents, anything that proves the timeline of what happened. I'll reach out to my contacts who track luxury pet sales," Daniel said. "Rich collectors pay a fortune for exotic cubs. Someone's bound to know something." They agreed their first step would be investigating the suspicious vendor through Daniel's access to wildlife trade registries. Caroline would continue her routine at work while discreetly documenting everything she could. Back at the center that afternoon, Caroline maintained a professional mask as she made her rounds. Her phone was ready in her pocket, camera primed to capture evidence. When Brent wasn't looking, she photographed the torn corner of the Leopard's den, the access logs, delivery records, anything that might help build their case. Her heart ached. As she passed the mother leopard's enclosure, the big cat's cries had grown hoarse but hadn't ceased. She paced relentlessly, calling for her stolen cub with raw desperation that made Caroline's chest tight. "I promise we'll find your baby," she whispered when no one was around to hear. As evening approached, Daniel texted updates. His contacts had identified 3 potential buyers in the region known for collecting exotic pets. He was cross-referencing their recent activity with the vendor's shipping patterns. Caroline met him briefly in the parking lot after her shift. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep orange as the Leopard's calls echoed across the grounds. "We have to move fast," Daniel said gravely. "These kinds of transactions happen quickly. The longer we wait, the colder the trail gets." Caroline watched the mother leopard through the fence, her heart breaking at the animal's unwavering faith that her cries would bring her cub home. "Then we won't wait," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes, we're going to find that cub and expose." "What's happening here?" Daniel nodded, his expression determined. "First thing tomorrow, I'll run that vendor through every registry we have access to. If they've made similar shipments before, we'll find the pattern." They parted ways as night fell, united in purpose. Caroline took one last look at the leopard's enclosure before leaving. The mother's silhouette was barely visible in the growing darkness, but her calls carried clearly through the evening air, a reminder of everything at stake. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wildlife center as Caroline made her usual rounds. Something felt off today. There was an unusual tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. She noticed Brent watching her from a distance, his eyes following her movements with barely concealed hostility. As she approached the leopard enclosure, she heard the maintenance crew working nearby. The familiar sound of tools and equipment filled the air, but something about the timing seemed strange. Maintenance wasn't usually scheduled during morning feeding hours. The mother leopard was unusually agitated, pacing back and forth along the fence line. Her powerful muscles rippled beneath her spotted coat as she moved, her tail twitching with nervous energy. Caroline checked her clipboard, frowning at the sudden schedule change. "Just routine maintenance," Brent called out, his voice carrying an edge that made Caroline's skin prickle. Nothing to worry about, but there was plenty to worry about. As Caroline watched, the electronic gate mechanism made an odd clicking sound. The safety barrier shifted slightly, just enough to create a gap. The Leopard noticed immediately, her entire body tensing as she sensed the weakness in her enclosure. Caroline's heart leaped into her throat. Something's wrong with the gate, she shouted, already moving toward the emergency equipment locker. The mother leopard was becoming more agitated by the second, her movements more purposeful as she tested the barrier. The alarm should have sounded by now. Caroline glanced at the control panel. The warning lights remained dark. The backup systems weren't responding. Everyone clear the area, Caroline commanded, grabbing barrier boards and a tranquilizer gun loaded with a low-dose sedative. She didn't want to knock the leopard out, just calm her enough to prevent disaster. The mother leopard surged toward the weakened section of fence, her powerful body coiling to spring. Caroline rushed forward with the barrier boards, her movements careful but urgent. She could hear staff members shouting behind her, but she kept her focus on the cat's body language. Years of experience had taught her to read the subtle signals, the position of the ears, the tension in the shoulders, the dilation of the pupils. The leopard was terrified, not aggressive. That knowledge saved Caroline's life in the next moment. As she positioned the barrier board, the leopard lunged. Caroline jerked backward, feeling the rush of air as massive paws swept past her face. She stumbled, but kept her footing, maintaining eye contact with the frightened animal while slowly reaching for the tranquilizer gun. "Easy, girl," she murmured, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Easy now." The leopard's claws had missed her by inches. Behind her, she could hear people screaming, but she didn't dare take her eyes off the cat. Carefully, she raised the tranquilizer gun, administering a small dose meant to calm rather than incapacitate. "What do you think you're doing?" "Brett's voice boomed across the enclosure. "Get out of there now." Caroline held her ground, watching as the mild sedative began to take effect. The mother leopard's movements became less frantic, though her eyes remained fixed on the gap in the fence. With the immediate danger reduced, Caroline and two other handlers quickly secured the temporary barriers. "Your reckless behavior put everyone at risk." Brent was shouting now, his face red with what looked like rage, or perhaps fear that his plan had failed. "You had no authority to interfere." The Wildlife Center's director arrived moments later, his expensive loafers incongruous on the dusty ground. "What happened here?" Dr. Mercer endangered both staff and animals with her unauthorized intervention, Brent said quickly. "She ignored protocols and nearly got herself killed." Caroline stood her ground. "The enclosure malfunctioned during unscheduled maintenance. The alarms failed to activate, and the backup systems were unresponsive. That's 3 separate systems failing simultaneously." The director's face remained impassive. "Due to this incident, I'm suspending access to certain areas pending a full review. That includes the leopard enclosure, Dr. Mercer." Caroline felt her hands trembling with adrenaline and anger. This wasn't a malfunction, it was sabotage. A warning to stop investigating. A missing cub. But instead of frightening her into submission, it had the opposite effect. Her resolve hardened like steel. As soon as the others left, she began documenting everything. Her phone camera clicked rapidly as she photographed the damaged gate mechanism, the disabled alarm system, and the scratches left by the leopard's claws. She noted the exact times of each event, creating a detailed timeline of the incident. The mother leopard had calmed considerably, but still watched Caroline intently through the reinforced barrier. Her eyes held the same desperate intelligence. That had first caught Caroline's attention, the knowing look of a mother separated from her child. "I haven't forgotten," Carolyn whispered to her. "I promise." That evening, exhausted but determined, Caroline was updating her case notes when her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Need to meet. Now." They met at their usual spot, a quiet coffee shop 20 minutes from the center. Daniel's face was flushed with excitement as he spread several printouts on the table. "We got a hit," he said, pointing to a highlighted section. "One of the buyers we flagged, a wealthy collector who lives about 3 hours north of here. He just acquired what's being called a rare infant cat through private channels. The timing matches perfectly." Caroline's hand shook as she read the details. "This is it," she breathed. "This is the proof we've been waiting for." "There's more," Daniel continued. "This buyer has a history of purchasing exotic animals through questionable means. He's careful, but he's got a pattern." The mother leopard's cries echoed in Caroline's memory as she studied the documents. The incident at the enclosure had been meant to scare her away, but it had only confirmed what she already knew. She was getting too close to the truth. Now, with this new lead, she was closer than ever to finding the missing cub. Caroline's fingers flew across her keyboard, cross-referencing timestamps as her heart pounded. The vendor logs from the mysterious delivery truck matched perfectly with the collector's purchase records Daniel had uncovered. A clear pattern emerged. A Wednesday night transfer, carefully hidden in falsified paperwork, but now exposed by their investigation. "Got you," she whispered, printing out the damning timeline. Her hand shook slightly as she gathered the papers, each page another piece of evidence that couldn't be ignored. The mother leopard's cries echoed in her mind as she walked purposefully toward the director's office. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hallway windows. Caroline knocked firmly on the heavy wooden door, clutching her folder of evidence. "Come in," the director called, his voice carrying that familiar note of administrative detachment. Caroline entered, noting how he barely looked up from his computer. "Sir, I have concrete proof of illegal wildlife trafficking through our facility." She laid out the documents on his desk, pointing to the matching timestamps. The vendor logs aligned perfectly with the collector's purchase. This wasn't just one incident. It's an organized operation. The director finally looked up, his face hardening. "Dr. Mercer, I've just finished reviewing the incident report from yesterday's enclosure malfunction." He pushed her evidence aside, without even glancing at it. "Your reckless behavior put staff and animals at risk. This, combined with your continued insubordination regarding the leopard situation, leaves me no choice." Caroline's stomach dropped. "Sir, please look at the evidence. You're suspended, effective immediately." His voice was cold. "Security will escort you to clear out your office." Caroline stood her ground. "This isn't about safety protocols. You're trying to silence me because I've uncovered something bigger than just one missing cub, haven't I?" The director's expression turned to steel. "Your badge, Dr. Mercer. Now." As Caroline unclipped her ID badge, her mind raced. This wasn't just about one corrupt handler or even one facility. This was systematic. The director's immediate shutdown of her evidence proved it. They were part of a larger network, using the center's legitimate operations as cover for wildlife trafficking. Outside the office, a security guard waited to escort her. Caroline held her head high as she walked to her office, ignoring the whispers from other staff members. Her hands trembled slightly as she packed her personal items into a cardboard box, but her resolve strengthened with each moment. The mother leopard's cries carried across the grounds as she walked to her car. Caroline paused, looking back at the enclosure. "I'm not abandoning you," she whispered. "Or your cub." She drove straight to Daniel's research station, finding him analyzing satellite imagery on his computer. His face fell when she walked in with the box. "They suspended you?" "They had to," Caroline said, setting down her things. We're too close to exposing them. Show me what you've found. Daniel pulled up high-resolution satellite images of the collector's estate. It's a massive property, heavily secured. He pointed to several structures scattered across the grounds. These appear to be custom-built animal enclosures. And look at this. He zoomed in on one area. Private airstrip. Perfect for moving animals without scrutiny. Carolyn leaned closer, studying the layout. We need to get this to law enforcement before they move the cub. I've already started. Compiling property records, Daniel said, pulling out a thick folder. The owner has shell companies within shell companies, but I've traced the connections. The problem is, by the time we navigate the bureaucracy, the cub could disappear forever, Caroline finished. She sat heavily in a spare chair, running her hands through her hair. We need a two-track approach. Start the official process, but Daniel met her eyes. But we can't wait for it. He pulled out a detailed map of the estate. I have a contact in the Wildlife Crimes Unit, someone I trust. We can alert them while we do our own reconnaissance. Caroline studied the property layout, noting access points as security patterns. Her career was already on the line. Now it was time to risk everything to make this right. I'm in. When do we start? Tonight, Daniel said firmly. I'll get my trail cameras and surveillance gear. We need to confirm the cub's presence before anyone can move it. As they planned their approach, Carolyn felt a mix of fear and determination settle in her chest. She'd lost her job, but she'd gained something more important. Absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. The mother leopard's cries had led her to uncover something far darker than she'd initially suspected, and she wouldn't stop until she'd seen it through. The director thinks suspending me will shut this down, she said, marking potential observation points on the map. But he just freed me up to focus entirely on exposing them. Daniel squeezed her shoulder supportively. Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. Are you sure about this? There's no going back. Caroline thought of the mother leopard, still calling for her stolen cub. She thought of all the other animals that might have disappeared through this network of corruption. Her path was clear. I've never been more sure of anything, she said firmly. Let's bring that cub home. Caroline's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she laid out their supplies on Daniel's kitchen table, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. The morning light streamed through the wide window, soft at first and then sharper, highlighting the array of equipment they gathered. 2 professional-grade tranquilizer kits, a high-resolution camera with night vision capability, and several carefully folded satellite maps of the estate grounds that gleamed faintly in the golden glow. The table itself looked less like a piece of furniture and more like the command center for a dangerous mission. Double-check the dosages, she said, her tone steady but edged with tension as she examined each dart with careful precision. Her fingers lingered on the tiny vials, scrutinizing the measurements as though a single mistake could doom the entire rescue. We can't risk anything going wrong when we find the cub. Daniel nodded silently, his brow furrowed as he cross-referenced the measurements against his wildlife manual. His finger traced each line, his lips moving slightly as he read to himself. These are calibrated for a leopard cub's weight range, he confirmed after a moment. Enough to sedate safely, not enough to harm. His voice carried a quiet conviction, but his eyes betrayed the weight of responsibility pressing on him. They spent the next hour memorizing the security patterns Daniel had observed over the past 2 days. The estate's guards moved in predictable cycles, making their rounds every 2 hours, with a longer gap between 2 and 4 in the morning. Carolyn repeated the schedule aloud until it was etched into memory, as though committing it to instinct. There's dense tree cover along the eastern fence, Daniel explained, pointing to the map with a calloused finger. His nail tapped the area twice, punctuating his words. We can use that approach to stay hidden. The thermal imaging should pick up any heat signatures from the outbuildings and save us precious time. Caroline pulled out her phone, synchronizing her watch with Daniel's in a practiced motion. Security does their main rounds at midnight, 2 and 4. That gives us our window. Her voice carried a quiet determination, though her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a pen. She began writing, the ink scratching across the paper in deliberate strokes. The letter was brief, but heavy with meaning, detailing their suspicions and evidence about the trafficking operation. When she sealed it in an envelope addressed to her most trusted colleague at the State Wildlife Authority, her expression hardened, knowing what it symbolized. "If I don't make it back," she said softly, handing the envelope to Daniel, "this needs to reach them." Daniel's expression turned grave as he tucked the letter into his jacket's inner pocket, close to his chest. "We're both coming back," he replied firmly. "With the cub." Before leaving, Caroline insisted on one last stop at the Wildlife Center. In the growing dusk, she approached the mother leopard's enclosure. The big cat's cries had grown hoarser, but no less desperate over the past days, raw with longing and frustration. Standing before the fence, Caroline pressed her hand lightly against the metal. She spoke softly, her voice catching in her throat. "I promise you, we're bringing your baby home tonight." The leopard's golden eyes met hers with startling clarity, and for a moment, the crying ceased. It was as if the mother truly understood, the silence more powerful than any roar. The drive to the estate took 45 minutes, filled with quiet discussion of logistics. The SUV hummed along the winding roads as shadows stretched across the landscape. They reviewed their roles, backup plans, and emergency protocols with the precision of soldiers preparing for battle. "If we get separated," Daniel said, his hands tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, "head back to the meeting point. No heroics." "Agreed," Caroline replied, though the look in her eyes revealed a truth they both knew: she wouldn't leave without the cub. They parked Daniel's SUV at a scenic pull-off half a mile from the estate's perimeter. The spot was popular with hikers, its casual traffic making their vehicle inconspicuous in the evening. As they gathered their gear, the weight of night settled around them like a thick blanket, pressing in from all sides. Moving through the woods, they stayed low and quiet, the crunch of twigs muted beneath their careful steps. Caroline's heart thundered in her chest, but her steps were steady, her body driven by resolve. Daniel led the way, every movement deliberate, his years of tracking experience evident in the way he seemed to blend with the shadows dot at the edge of the tree line. They crouched low. Daniel raised the thermal binoculars, the faint glow of the device illuminating his face. He scanned the cluster of outbuildings beyond the fence, his breathing slow and controlled. 3 distinct heat signatures in the main barn, he whispered, his voice barely audible. 2 larger ones, probably guards. 1 smaller, separate from the others. Caroline's breath caught as a sound drifted faintly across the darkness, a high, plaintive cry that pierced her chest. She would know that sound anywhere. It was the unmistakable call of a leopard cub. "That's confirmation," she breathed, her voice trembling with relief and determination. "The cub's alive." Daniel lowered the binoculars, his jaw tightening, his expression both concerned and resolute. "Now we know where, but getting in there won't be easy." Caroline checked her watch. 11:35 p.m. They had 25 minutes until the midnight security round. Another cry came, thin and desperate, pulling at her heart like a physical tether. She thought of the mother leopard, still calling for her baby, and steeled herself for what was to come. "We stick to the plan," she whispered, forcing calm into her voice. "Observe first. We need to document everything before we move in." She patted the camera secured to her belt with deliberate care. "Once we have proof, then we get the cub." The night pressed close around them, heavy and suffocating as they settled in to wait. The cub's intermittent cries carried through the darkness, their fragile beacon of hope. Caroline's hand rested on the tranquilizer kit at her hip, her body taut with readiness for whatever challenges lay ahead. They had found their target, now came the hard part. Caroline's heart thundered in her chest as she and Daniel approached the side service door of the estate's main outbuilding. The metal door loomed before them, its edges worn from years of use. Daniel produced a small toolkit and worked quickly. On the lock, while Caroline kept watch, her hands steady on the tranquilizer kit strapped to her side. "Got it," Daniel whispered, easing the door open with minimal noise. The hinges gave a soft protest as they slipped inside. The corridor stretched ahead, dark and foreboding. Their flashlights cut thin beams through the darkness, revealing concrete walls and a utilitarian floor. The air hung heavy with the unmistakable scent of animals and antiseptic, a combination Caroline knew all too well from her veterinary work. "Look," she murmured, directing her light toward the walls. Cages lined both sides of the hallway, most empty, but some containing various exotic animals. Her stomach churned as she documented everything with her camera, the soft click of the shutter accompanying their careful footsteps. Daniel pointed to a shelf unit filled with veterinary supplies. "This is definitely not legal," he said, photographing vials of restricted medications and surgical equipment that had no business being in a private collection. They moved deeper into the building, Caroline cataloging every violation they encountered. Transport crates stacked in corners, feeding schedules hastily scrawled on clipboards, and shipping manifests that told a damning story of illegal wildlife trafficking. Without warning, bright lights blazed to life overhead. Caroline threw up, her arm to shield her eyes, momentarily blinded by the sudden glare. As her vision adjusted, her blood ran cold. Brent Holloway stood at the end of the corridor, his broad frame blocking their path. A radio hung from his belt, and his face wore a smirk that made Caroline's skin crawl. Well, he drawled. "Looks like someone doesn't know when to quit." He lifted the radio to his mouth, but instead of calling for security, his thumb moved to a different button. The sound of a heavy latch releasing echoed through the corridor. Caroline's trained ear recognized it immediately, a holding pen door. Before she could shout a warning, a large Bengal tiger emerged from a side chamber, its muscles rippling under orange and black fur. Time seemed to slow. Caroline's years of training kicked in as the big cat's eyes locked onto them. She could read its body language, confused, agitated, but not yet in full attack mode. They had seconds, if that. "Don't run," she breathed to Daniel, who'd gone completely still beside her. Her hands moved with practiced precision to the tranquilizer kit, selecting the correct dose for a tiger of this size. One chance to get this right dot. The tiger's tail lashed, its shoulders bunching in preparation to spring. Caroline's movements remained smooth and deliberate, her voice low and steady as she spoke in calm, even tones. The big cat's ears flicked toward her voice, buying precious seconds as she loaded the dart. When it finally charged, Caroline was ready. She timed her shot perfectly. Not too soon, not too late. The dart found its mark in the tiger's shoulder. The big cat stumbled, its charge faltering as the sedative took effect. Within moments, it sank to the floor, breathing steadily in drug-induced sleep. "No!" Brent snarled, his face contorting with rage as his trap quite literally fell flat. Daniel had already sprung into action, camera documenting everything. The tiger, Brent's position, the remote release mechanism. All of it would serve as evidence of his deliberate endangerment. The cub, Caroline reminded him urgently. They needed to complete their mission before Brent could radio for backup. Daniel nodded, moving quickly to check a row of smaller crates near the back wall. "Here," he called out, his voice thick with emotion. Caroline rushed to his side, her heart in her throat as she peered into the small crate he'd indicated. Two golden eyes blinked back at her, tired and frightened, but alive. The missing leopard cub lay curled in the corner, clearly weak but responsive to their presence. For one shining moment, triumph surged through Caroline's chest. They had done it. They had found the cub, neutralized Brent's deadly trap, and gathered irrefutable evidence of the trafficking operation. The mother leopard's cries had led them true, and justice was within reach. Daniel was already preparing a carrier for safer transport, and Caroline began a quick medical assessment of the cub. They needed to move fast, get out while they still could. But even as they worked to secure their exit, Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had come too easily. She was right. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Brent moved with shocking speed, cutting off their escape route. Caroline's heart hammered in her chest as she found herself backed into a narrow service hallway, the cold concrete walls pressing in on either side. Daniel was somewhere behind her, but separated by Brent's hulking form. "You really should have minded your own business, Dr. Mercer," Brent said, his voice eerily calm. His eyes were flat and emotionless, like a snake's. "But now you force my hand. It's a shame. People will believe you had a breakdown after that suspension. Wandered off, maybe got lost in the woods. These things happen." Caroline's breath caught in her throat. The clinical way he delivered the threat made it all the more terrifying. He had clearly done this before, had clearly made other problems disappear. "You won't get away with this," she managed, though her voice shook slightly. "There's too much evidence now." Brent's lip curled. Evidence can disappear too. Just like a high, desperate cry pierced the air. The leopard cub calling out from the crate where Daniel had found it. The sound was so like its mother's cries back at the center that it struck Caroline straight in the heart. In that split second, Brent's focus wavered. His head turned slightly toward the sound, muscles tensing in irritation. Caroline didn't hesitate. Years of handling large animals had taught her about leverage and momentum. She lunged forward, ducking low and driving her shoulder into Brent's midsection while his attention was divided. The narrow hallway worked to her advantage. There was nowhere for him to dodge. They crashed together in a brutal tangle of limbs. Brent was bigger and stronger, but Caroline was fighting for more than just herself. She thought of the mother leopard's endless crying, of the tiny cub in that dark crate, of all the other animals that must have disappeared through this pipeline, of greed and cruelty. The close quarters made it impossible for Brent to bring his full strength to bear. Caroline used the wall to brace herself, deflecting his wild grab and ramming her knee up hard. He doubled over with a grunt of pain. She twisted, using his own momentum to slam him face first into the concrete wall. There was a sickening crack as his head connected. Brent slumped, not quite unconscious, but dazed. Caroline didn't waste the opportunity. She had him on his stomach, with his arms behind his back before he could recover, her knee pressed firmly between his shoulder blades. "Daniel, the zip ties," she called out, her voice rough with exertion. Daniel appeared at her side, already pulling the heavy-duty zip ties from their emergency kit. Together, they secured Brent's wrists and ankles, making sure the restraints were tight but not cutting off circulation. Caroline's hands were shaking, but her movements were precise. This had to be done by the book. They couldn't give him any grounds for claiming mistreatment later. As soon as Brent was properly restrained, Daniel pulled out his phone. "Sending everything to Rodriguez now," he said, referring to their contact in law enforcement. His fingers flew over the screen, transmitting their location data along with the photos they'd taken of the cages, the stockpile of illegal veterinary drugs, and the sedated cat from Brent's failed trap. Caroline pushed herself to her feet, suddenly aware of every aching muscle. The adrenaline was starting to ebb, leaving room for the delayed wave of fear to wash over her. Her legs felt unsteady. As she made her way to the crate containing the leopard cub, the tiny creature looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. Caroline's veterinary training took over, pushing back her emotional turmoil as she carefully lifted the cub and began checking its vital signs. The heartbeat was steady but slightly elevated, likely from stress. The cub was dehydrated, but otherwise appeared unharmed. Most importantly, it was young enough that reintroduction to its mother should still be possible. "How long until backup arrives?" she asked Daniel, cradling the cub against her chest. The small creature's warmth helped ground her, keeping the trembling in her hands at bay. Daniel pressed his phone to his ear, listening. "Rodriguez says 10 minutes at least. They're coming in quiet. No sirens yet to avoid tipping off any other players who might be involved." 10 minutes. Caroline took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. They had to hold their position and maintain the integrity of the evidence until law enforcement arrived. She looked down at Brent, who was now fully conscious and glaring at them with undisguised hatred. His nose was bleeding from hitting the wall, making him look even more menacing. The cub squirmed in her arms, letting out another cry, so like its mother's that Caroline could almost hear the echo of those heartbreaking wails that had started this whole journey. The sound strengthened her resolve. She had promised that Mother Leopard she would bring her baby home, and she intended to keep that promise. "Stay alert," she told Daniel, keeping her voice low. "We don't know if he has other partners here." She shifted her grip on the cub, making sure she could move quickly if needed. "This isn't over until we get this little one back where it belongs." Daniel nodded grimly, positioning himself where he could watch both ends of the hallway while keeping Brent in sight. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness, marked only by their tense breathing and the occasional muffled curse from their captive. The wail of sirens pierced the night as law enforcement vehicles flooded the estate grounds, their flashing lights painting the darkness in stark red and blue. Caroline held the weakened leopard cub close to her chest, its tiny heart beating against her palm as state police and federal wildlife agents swarmed the property. "Over here," Daniel called out, directing the first responders to where Brent lay restrained. His expertise showed as he methodically walked the officers through the evidence trail. The sedated large cat, the makeshift holding pens, and the extensive documentation of illegal wildlife trafficking. Teams of officers moved systematically through the buildings, their flashlights revealing cage after cage. The sound of radio chatter filled the air as they cataloged their findings. "We've got controlled substances here," one agent called out. "Unauthorized veterinary equipment in the West Wing," another reported. Caroline watched as forensics teams photographed everything, carefully bagging documents and computer drives. Her attention stayed focused on the cub, checking its breathing and temperature, while a wildlife veterinarian she recognized from state services approached to assist. "Dehydrated but stable," she reported, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We need to get this little one back to its mother as soon as possible." The evidence mounted by the hour. In the director's private office, investigators uncovered emails and financial records that painted a damning picture. The trafficking operation stretched back years, with the director providing cover while Brent handled the actual theft and transport of animals. When they led Brent out in handcuffs, he didn't look at Caroline. His shoulders slumped in defeat as officers read him his rights. The director arrived shortly after, summoned by police, his usual polished appearance crumbling as agents presented him with the seized documentation of his involvement. "Get everything?" Daniel asked one of the lead investigators, who nodded while reviewing his checklist. "Chain of custody is solid," the agent confirmed. "The evidence handling has been textbook. You two did good work here." The return to the Wildlife Center felt surreal in the pale light of dawn. Under the watchful eye of state wildlife officials who had taken temporary control of the facility, Caroline carried the cub toward its mother's enclosure. Her heart pounded with equal parts exhaustion and hope. The mother leopard's cries, which had haunted the center for days, grew louder as they approached. But these were different now, urgent, anticipatory. Caroline followed careful reintroduction protocols, allowing the mother to see and smell her cub through a protective barrier first. The moment they opened the partition was breathtaking. The mother leopard moved with infinite gentleness, approaching, her cub with soft chuffing sounds. Caroline held her breath as the big cat delicately nuzzled her baby, then began to groom it with tender sweeps of her rough tongue. The cries that had driven Caroline to action finally ceased. In their place came only the soft sounds of reunion, a purring rumble from the mother, tiny mewling responses from her cub, as it nursed for the first time in days. Daniel stood beside Caroline at a respectful distance, watching the scene unfold. "Look at that," he said softly. "Worth every risk we took." In the days that followed, as the dust settled, Caroline received official reinstatement papers from the State Wildlife Board. The formal acknowledgement came with an apology and commendation for her actions in exposing the trafficking ring. But it was the quiet pride of doing what was right, not the recognition, that meant the most to her. She found Daniel in the observation area one evening, both of them watching the leopard family. Through the viewing window, the mother lay curled protectively around her cub, both peacefully asleep. "I couldn't have done this without you," Caroline said, breaking the comfortable silence. "When everyone else thought I was crazy or causing trouble, you listened. You believed me." Daniel turned to face her, his expression soft in the dim light. "You had the courage to stand up for what you knew was right. I just followed your lead." Something shifted between them in that quiet moment. The trust forged in crisis, evolving into something deeper. Caroline felt it in the way their shoulders touched as they stood side by side, in the gentle brush of his hand against hers. "What happens now?" she asked, not just meaning the center's future under new management. "Now?" Daniel smiled. "We keep doing what's right, together." Before them, the leopard family slept on, mother and cub finally at peace. Their reunion stood as living proof that courage and persistence could overcome corruption, that justice could restore what greed had tried to destroy. For Caroline, it marked not just the end of a case or the salvation of her career, but the beginning of something new, something real and promising, built on shared principles and the trust that came from facing danger side by side. Thank you for watching. If even one moment stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another story that speaks to the heart.